Good morning, everyone. Well, now it's afternoon as of a minute ago. Good morning, Kimba. Good afternoon, Kimba.
Okay, sorry, let me turn this around here.
All righty. Yes.
All right, there we
Oh,
go.
look how beautiful you look today.
Got to keep up with you.
Oh, hello, Kimba. What's going on today?
Hello.
Are you taking a lunch break right now?
I am taking a lunch break.
Thank you. Thank you for taking your lunch break with me. Thank you for being willing to come and share a little bit with us. Hello, everyone. Good
Hello, everyone.
to
Hi,
see
Kayla.
you. Hello. Everyone joining, waving. Thank you
Hear
so
me
much.
okay?
I can hear you just fine. I turned my...
It's a little bit of an echo, so maybe.
You have a little echo? I think we're good. Best lunch break ever. Hello. Hi, Crystal. Hi, Winona. Thank you, everyone, for being here, for joining. And thank you, Kimba, again. Good afternoon from Southampton, UK. Wow. So that must be 6 hours ahead of us. Is that right? Hello, Daddy.
Hi, Dad Ford.
Thanks for
Well, I'm
joining me.
so honored to be here. I have really gained a lot from your Instagram Live, and I'm so I've been challenged to grow your dedication to the social justice issue. I do have a very important question.
Yes.
Did you get pickles on your husband's sandwich? Just need to know.
I did. I got extra,
Okay.
actually. Amen.
Okay. As long as that's
my
taken care of, because I respect him, and that was a
Yes,
concern
you
of his
do.
in the last couple of lives. So I just want to make sure he got pickles on his sandwich. Okay, well then we're ready to go.
And I'm sure he will appreciate you having his back for sure. So if he tunes in at some point, or if he watches later, he'll see that you had his best interest at heart.
Absolutely.
So Kimba.
Yes.
Again, thank you for indulging me. Thank you for allowing us to be witness to your lived experiences today. Yes, beautiful Kimba. We've known each other for a long time, a very long time. We met in graduate school because we were neighbors. Yes. And I remember our first real conversation that we had was about a young lady with the same first and middle name as yours. And that was the Kimba Nyambi who President Clinton actually granted clemency for, right? So we talked a lot about mandatory minimums that day. We discussed how you could even relate to some of her story, which was a whole nother live for a whole nother day.
Absolutely, another day.
Yes, another day. But through the years, we've continued to stay in touch, even post school. My boys probably don't know this, but you're responsible for them being here. Because both times I decided to throw my pack of pills away was because you came to visit or you were somewhere and you said, Barbara, why don't you just have kids? I don't know what you're waiting for. So anyway, thank you for being who you've been in our lives. And just something I was thinking about today before I logged on. I said, there's a concept in psychology, and I couldn't think of it. Psychology, counseling, in the mental health field. If someone can think of it, please let us know. It basically says that we think that people are the same way. We think that people think the same way that we do because we like them, right? So basically, because we like them, they must think the way we do. But what we realize is that complementarity in relationships is actually what sustains relationships more than similarity. So I've really grown to appreciate that even more as we've gotten older in our relationship. because as we grew, the more I realized how dissimilar a lot of our views were, a lot of our beliefs were, and we kind of laugh about it.
We do.
And we kind of know, we know, like, oh, okay, this is how she feels about this because of blah, blah, blah. And I know how you feel about certain things. And so we have a lot of similarities, but we also have some points where we're like, that's not where I am with that. But we can still engage respectfully.
Absolutely.
And still love each other despite our differences. And then, of
Absolutely.
course, love. Is that false consensus bias? Thank you, Winona. Thank you so much, my psychology people in the house. So we ended up here today because I've been slightly begging you to talk about this issue. At one point, I even tried to guilt you by
trying to bust me out, y'all. That ain't even right, but it's true.
I know. And I even tried to guilt you by saying, okay, just pray about it. Because when people usually say pray about it, like that's their way of guilting you. But actually, we ended up here today because you wrote a post, a really poignant, deep post. And for a while, you had been saying, I don't know how I feel about everything that's going on right now. But I want to know if you would mind just sharing and letting you talk. If you would mind just sharing that post to just start our conversation today.
Okay, you want me to read it?
Yeah, that'd be perfect.
Okay, so this is the post. Okay. Dear Journal, Dr. Shabazz hit it on the head. I feel so tired, and I know I need to rest and stop expecting people to get it. Why can't they hear me? That outside of America, I'm seen as an American, but inside America, I'm seen as a Black person, which places me on an unlevel playing field. And I read the rest of the post, and my white side wonders if I'm listening enough, doing enough, and I'm back to being exhausted. And so, Journal, I'm back to where I've been many times. I was 8 years old. Not really Black enough for the Black people in my Black family, because I don't protest and bleed blue when cut. And feeling a certain way when I'm in conversation with my Black friends who say, the white people. Somehow they dismiss and forget the fact that my mom is white, and by the way, far from racist. And then there's the conversations with my white friends and family members. Conversations laced with distractive, dismissive attitudes, filled with racial tendencies and insensitivity. And yet I commit to the hard, uncomfortable places and spaces, even though this lends to the risk of a possible painful breach in relationship. I think I should unplug and pray, but that Journal is judged as inaction, falling into the white man's religion and being silent. So what do I do? Maybe just go back to the basics. For God so loved the world. And so to fix a heart problem, we have to lay at the foot of the cross to learn to imitate balance of walking with justice and mercy as Jesus Christ did. I don't know, Journal. I mean, I know it's a black and white issue, but people are so much more than black or white.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing that. So I'll just start with a little bit of what you read. I remember years ago saying to you, as I was probably on one of my diatribes about how I've been discriminated against that day, white people this and white people that and white. And then I just kind of looked at you and I was like, I'm so sorry, Kimba. How does that make you feel when I talk about white people? I mean, I've met your mom. I know your mom. I love your mom. And she's a beautiful person who I've never felt these things from. But how does that make you feel when Black people talk about white people, either knowingly or not really realizing like, oh, that is a part of who you are?
Absolutely.
Mhm.
I think that it just depends on kind of where I am. I mean, with you and people I'm in relationship, I
Mhm.
don't think much of it because I grew up in the Black community.
Yeah. Okay.
But I must say recently it is more heightened for me
Mhm.
with the recent incidents because I have had a very strong connection with my white family.
Mm.
And so it does create a conflict for me,
Mhm.
and it's hard for me, and sometimes I have to, make a comment, or I like to surprise people and say, well, my mom's white. So, recently it has been a little bit harder, but mostly with friends, it's
Mhm.
because I do identify Black, and so it's nothing I really get offended about.
Mhm. And so that's another question I wanted to ask you because I've heard some people say, well, biracial is really not the right word to use. I've talked to you, and I know that is a word that you're comfortable with. But some people say, we should just call people multiracial. We should, call them a mosaic. What are your thoughts about how you position yourself? Is there a category that you are either or do we really have to assign ourselves to categories when we are of mixed ethnicity?
Well, in America, you do.
Mm-hmm.
And so it has a lot to do with what you've been taught. And as I share with you, when I was in eighth grade, I had a distinct memory of, the teacher called us our by the name, and then you had to tell him,
Mm-hmm.
black or white.
Right.
And at that time, my mother was like, we don't say black and white in our house. We describe people. There's no real black and white people. Like
Mm-hmm.
you don't look at someone and they're black. So
Mm-hmm.
she was kind of on that at the moment. So I
Okay.
told him other, and
Mm.
he looked at me and said, you have to pick one.
Mm. Mm-hmm.
So in America, yeah, you have to pick one. And so, you know, it's unfortunate. If there's
Right.
a other box, I'm happy because
Yeah.
I'll pick it.
Yeah.
I have that liberty to
Right.
pick it. Not.
Mm-hmm. And have
I was
most
raised I was raised to identify as African American by my father, even though
right.
that was hard for my mother during times. So,
Uh-huh.
that's what I choose. That's my go-to. But if there's a other box, oh yeah, I don't want to deny the other
You're
part of
choosing it.
me.
Okay. Tell me about some of your experiences with your white side, your experiences with your black side.
Well, growing up, as I
Uh-huh.
kind of told you a little bit about the other day that was
Uh-huh.
brought back to my memory is,
Yeah.
before the age of 8, I thought I was adopted at times
Mm.
because no one looked like me besides my brother. I knew I came with my brother,
Yeah.
but we were in an all black neighborhood. My
Mm.
mother chose that, my parents chose that, and so
Mhm.
people would stare at my mother
Mm.
in the grocery stores and make comments.
Mhm.
And then when we would come to Marion to visit the white side of my family, I remember people being with my uncle. He didn't see it. My
Right.
uncle doesn't see that stuff.
Right.
But people would give us the side eye, like
Mhm.
trying to figure out how this black girl is with this white guy.
Mhm.
So within my family, I
Right.
was in a very safe, protective environment. But
Mhm.
outside, oh yeah, it was quite an interesting experience. Now in
Mhm.
my neighborhood, I didn't have a problem. Again, we were told you identify as black, you look as black. So me and my brother did that.
Right.
But yeah, it was some crazy experiences. Middle school was the worst. Do you want me to go
Uh-huh.
ahead and
Yeah, can we before we get to middle school, Winona said, what was the rationale, kind of piggybacking off of what you said, what was the rationale for your father having you to identify as black? Was that to a move to protect you? Was that like a protective measure?
well, there's this conception, or it was a law at one time, if you have a drop of black blood, and that's not what the law said. I can't think of the law right
Right,
now.
right,
You were considered black.
right.
And so my father, yes, I
Mm-hmm.
think he was trying to protect us.
Mm-hmm.
But I also think it was just, not being ashamed of your heritage and realizing that's how people are going to look at you.
Mm-hmm.
It
Right.
might not be how you feel,
Yeah.
but that's how people are going to look at you. So yeah, I think that was part of it.
Yeah. I hear you. I hear you. Middle school. Tell us about middle school.
So middle school was extremely difficult for me.
Uh-huh.
I remember I have a distinct memory of being in social studies,
Mm-hmm.
and we learned about slavery the way
Mm-hmm.
you do in America, which is very broad. But I remember the guilt I felt when I heard about the slave owners and the things that they did, like guilt in my family. And then I remember hearing about the slaves and what the slaves went through. Like, I was just in that class, like, can I just hide under a desk? Like, there was such a heaviness on me because it was like slave owner side and the slave, and it was just all coming down on me, and I didn't even know what to do with all that. I didn't know what to do with that.
Yeah.
And there were a couple young ladies that looked like me, but they didn't act like me or have my values. So that wasn't helpful. I remember being in the cafeteria with my Black friends, and one of the young ladies saying, "Oh, we know you're going to choose Black when you go to college so you can get the Black money, but you're not really Black.
Wow.
You can get the scholarship." I was like, "Oh, okay." And I remember befriending a white young lady and becoming her friend, and she put a tack in my chair. And so it was like middle school was kind of this crazy, thing for me. And that's where this struggle started. Like, okay, what does Black look like? And can I do that? And what do I do with this white part of me?
Yeah.
So middle school was really hard.
And middle school is already hard enough. Like, that's
Absolutely.
one of the most tumultuous times in life, when we're really just trying to figure out who in the world we are, even more so than in later adolescence. So who did you identify with? I mean, I'm sure you got the question quite a bit, like, what are you? I'm sure you've heard that, right?
I did, Barbara.
A million times.
I did get that all the time.
I know that's what Black people say.
Yeah. And unfortunately, I'm also fascinated with it because I just want to, I spend so much time trying to find somebody to look like me that when I see somebody, I'm like, oh, I wonder what they have. I wonder if they have some white in them.
How they're,
But again, I think primarily I identified as Black. I grew up, in Dayton, Ohio, and in the urban school. So that's what I identified with. I think God blessed me to be able to have role models.
Yeah.
So I could see what a Black woman is. And then I had my mother and my white side to kind of just form what that looked like. But growing up, it was Black people. And I'll tell you why I knew that.
Yeah.
Because when I went to college and I was an RA, resident assistant, that's the first time I experienced racism. Like,
you felt
it came in my.
Okay.
I felt it.
What happened?
And I was like, oh, this is what my dad was talking about. And okay.
So he was socializing you. That was that racial socialization that he was trying to give you for you to be prepared for those moments when that mom side of you wasn't really going to be visible to the outside. So what happened?
I don't have a lot of detailed memory because it was move-in day for the freshmen.
Okay.
I was a sophomore. But I remember those parents look, and I believe, if I remember correctly, they asked for their daughter to be moved off my floor.
Wow. Floor. Not room, but floor. And we're not talking about like the 60s or even the 70s.
Oh, no.
I mean, this is like, like years and years and years later, but they still had that mindset, even in that setting where everyone was supposed to be on equitable ground anyway. And so what do you remember feeling at that point?
I just remember feeling, oh, this is why people talk about racism. Like, oh, okay, I get it. I understand. And it was very interesting because college, of course, it was the unspoken rule. I went to predominantly white Catholic school that I'm very grateful for because they gave me a full ride.
Yeah.
It was based on academics. It wasn't, I'm sure my race played into it, but it was on academics. So I'm grateful for that. But that it was just, as Black people, we stuck together.
Yeah.
But Barbara, I remember, I remember this African-American young lady, and she was very dark-skinned, and she never spoke to any of us, and I couldn't understand it. Like, I was so confused. I'm like, what is wrong with her? And then that's when I realized, culture and the way you're raised has a lot to do with who you identify, what culture you identify with,
Uh-huh.
right?
Uh-huh.
And so
Yeah.
that's the first time I realized that, because growing up in a Black environment, you don't always have to face those issues head on, because
Yeah.
you're in this protective environment. It doesn't mean
Right.
we didn't have teachers that were racist or those incidents, but
Right.
it's not like it was if you're in a different type of community or a
Yeah.
different part of the country.
Yes.
So that to me was so intriguing
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
when I was in my undergrad program.
Yeah. And you were probably wondering why she doesn't identify with us. Aren't we?
So confused.
Yeah. Yeah. Winona said, what is the proper way to ask someone, what are you?
Well, see, I don't have a lot of social rules, and I don't get offended very easy around this whole race thing. So I'm not a good person to ask.
Okay. Okay.
Because I appreciate questions. I love when my white family and friends say, I don't want to offend you, I have a question. So for me, I mean, I don't want people to be rude, like, what are you?
Right.
But I don't, there's not
You
a
don't
right or
mind
wrong
the
way.
inquisitiveness of it.
I don't.
Yeah.
I don't. And
Yeah.
because I think in the heart of it, I can usually tell when people are genuine or not. So you'll have to ask someone else. I'm sorry, I don't have a good answer for that.
No, that was, but that has a lot to do with your culture and the way that you grew up in the culture that you grew up in too, because that was probably part of the nuance and part of the dynamics where maybe you were socialized to have a little bit thicker skin and talk about these things from an early age.
Well, for me, I think I appreciate people realizing that I might be different.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because it used to be a sore spot. Oh, you got light skin and good hair. You don't have any problem. So when people ask me, just because they're inquisitive,
right,
I welcome it. Because for a long time I had to deal with that.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, you was up in this, in the masses house. You didn't have to deal with, all that kind of stuff I had to growing up. So for someone to want to know my story, and want to know about me,
Right.
I welcome that. I welcome that.
So from what you're saying, you're basically saying that you've been treated worse by Black people than you have by white people, judging from the comments that you just kind of threw out there.
Yeah. So a lot of the things I had to deal with in my 30s, especially asked to be involved in different activities with Black women,
Right.
I had to work some issues. I'm the girl that when I meet a couple, the Black woman puts her arm around her husband because she thinks I'm going to take him. So that's the kind of stuff that I've had to deal with. That I have some kind of privilege,
right,
because of the way I look, and I'm supposed to act a certain way.
Yeah.
And so it has been hard. As a truancy officer in a Black community.
Yep.
Oh yeah, that was, and looking back, and Mr. Satterfield kind of hit on this. Part of it was because I was a truancy officer,
Right.
but part of it is because they saw my hair and they saw my skin, and then attitude immediately.
Because you
I went on the
think
white
you're
side.
better.
Oh yeah, I go on the white side of town. Now they might be thinking it. I always was welcome.
Right.
On that side of town, and even within the community at work at times. So, yeah, definitely that whole light skin, pretty hair,
Colorism,
I dealt with that
hair texture,
entire life.
And Dayla said those comments are so real talk. What made you believe? What evidence do you have that this is the way people thought? How have people been overt to you? What type of overt things have they said? I know you talked about the overt actions of, just kind of like making sure my man is protected so you don't try to take him from me. But what have been some of the things that Black people specifically have said to you? Besides the scholarship.
Oh, yeah. That was a distinct memory.
Right.
Really, it's just, I remember calling a family on the phone because I talk the way I talk, which I don't talk like this all the time. Those times I'm using, down with crew. So I'm talking and Mommy, some white helpers on the phone.
Yeah.
And then I remember being at a home,
Mm-hmm.
and the lady opened the door, and I said, "Hey, I'm just such and such from Dayton Public Schools." And Barbara, looked me up and down and shut the door in my face and said, "I'm not letting that be a teacher."
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And at that moment, I was like, "Why didn't I bring my coworker with me? Why didn't I bring her? She has more of the vibe and more of the talk." And I was just sitting there. I was so mad at myself. I was like,
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
But yeah, just the underlying comments, like I said, and people, it comes off as a compliment too a lot of times.
Yeah.
Oh, your hair is so pretty.
Uh-huh. But that underneath, it's kind of like a backhanded compliment. Couple questions. Do you feel that Blacks are more overt and whites are more covert? I think you did kind of answer that with the bias or actions. First part of the question. Second part is, do you feel as though you view your treatment worse by Blacks because that was your main village that in which you were brought up in? So is the bias more overt? Do you find Blacks are more overt and whites are more covert? And do you feel this way and view your treatment by Blacks that way because that was your main village?
So I agree from my personal experience. Definitely more overt with African Americans, and that is part of our culture, right? I mean, Mr. Satterfield talked about that.
Right.
Like we are more, I'm just going to tell you, and more of the Caucasian is, I want to smile in your face when I'm saying stuff. So some of it is cultural. Gotcha. But yeah, I would say that's true from my experience.
Yeah.
Well, my experience is my experience. Yeah. So probably that is a really good point. I just have a distinct memory because I spent my first 3 years in a Christian school. And I remember in third grade going to the public school that was all Black. And the comments and it was like a cultural shock. Yeah. And those Black girls, most of them, I have one friend still today. Big shout out to Tiffany. Most of them, no. And then I got some of the older 5th and 6th graders. Well, I got attention from them. Yeah. But I didn't realize why I was getting attention. I was just so young and naive at the time. So that probably is true, because of how I grew up. But to be honest with you, even as an adult, sometimes like I said, it wasn't until adult that I started picking up on Black women grabbing their husbands. Yeah. Black communities. So that doesn't happen when I'm married. No. I'm talking to white people. So.
Yeah, I hear you.
So, but that's a fair thing to say. It is based on experience.
Of course. You are probably one of the best counselors who I know. Oh. And I always say that. And you just are. Okay. One of the best counselors. You've worked as a counselor. You've worked as a truancy officer, you mentioned. You've worked as a school psychologist. You've taught before as well. Currently, you are still working with students, even though it's online. Can we talk a little bit about some of the dynamics you've noticed in work and with your work? You talked a little bit about going out to the different communities that were predominantly Black and having, people respond to you in the way that they did. What are some other experiences that you've had?
Well, when I was in grad school, not with you.
Okay, different.
When in Dayton, I had the opportunity to work in a rural community. Never been in a rural community. And I remember having the conversation with my mother, like, oh my goodness, what if my car breaks down and I'm, by this cornfield and what's going to happen to me? And I got to make sure I get home before dark. And I mean, all these legitimate fears, we have as Black people. And she said, wow, I didn't realize I raised such a prejudiced child. Wow. And I was like, interesting. So I go out to the rural community. My very first day, I met this young boy His name was Chris. He was in the 4th grade.
Okay. What did he say?
He said, I just want to know why Black people are always robbing other people.
Wow.
And I said, where did you get that from? He said, that's what they say on the news.
Mm-hmm.
So that's what they show on the news, right? Every night there's crime. That's the big thing. And so
That's what we do.
I realized then
Mm-hmm.
I can't say then. I can talk about my history through that. But it
Okay.
reiterated image.
Yeah.
What we see in what's presented to us in media, like image is really, really important.
Mm-hmm.
And then what I realized too, what God taught me is it is, and you say this all the time, Barbara, it's a human experience, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And so
Right.
those the people I had the privilege to serve in that rural community had just as many problems, even though they might have looked different,
Mm-hmm.
but some of them weren't.
Mm-hmm.
Sexual abuse has no color.
Right. Right.
Alcoholism has no color.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And so I learned there in that community a lot.
Mm-hmm.
And I must say, I remember being in the staff meeting. I have never in my life been the only Black person. I was the only Black person. And I'm telling you all, I was sitting there like this, because usually it's at least a cafeteria person or a janitor or something. Usually get in there some type of way.
Right. Right. Right.
Only Black person.
Mm.
But they took good care of me.
Mm-hmm.
I remember a young lady, she was suicidal.
Mm-hmm.
And the grandfather was coming to pick her up, and he said, we know him to have made some statements.
Right.
We're going to keep the door open, and you let me know if you have any problems.
So they were aware and protective.
Oh, they were aware.
Yeah.
And very, very, this principal in particular, he was very aware.
Mm-hmm.
Because there were a couple of kids of color, and there, there's a little of us there here and there. And so the grandfather came in, girl, he was just as polite as you. If they hadn't told me that, I would have known. And that's how I felt led by God to go into that meeting. I just went in like I didn't know. Didn't even get a hint.
Right.
He was very respectful.
Yeah.
So that was my experience there.
Yeah.
I've worked in a variety of areas.
Right.
I'm currently though this area I'm in is very interesting. When I was younger, it was very distinct. There were distinct parts of town and things of that nature, but it's much more diverse in the sense that there's a lot of little girls and boys that look like me now.
So that representation is at play there for them when they look at you.
Yes, yes. I realized that too. I realized that in Virginia. I remember going into a school when I was in Virginia, and these little girls just kept looking at me. And I realized, Barbara, this was back before I grew up in Ohio. We Midwest up here.
Right.
This before Martin Luther King Day was recognized in Virginia.
That's right.
Now that was eye-opening for me. And I remember going into the building and all these little girls that kept looking at me, and I thought, what is wrong? There wasn't one Black teacher.
Nope.
There was no artwork with anyone of color. And so I was shocked and taken aback. So I think about that when little girls and boys are looking at me. They're like me when I was little, just looking for someone. Does someone look like me?
Yeah.
I didn't find that to middle school, and then I couldn't identify with it.
Right.
But now there is. You just have to make people aware. When I say make people aware, it's just sharing experiences. And so I make it very light at work.
Okay.
And there's an ongoing joke that Kimber will not go down roads that don't have a line in the middle. Like no one will be living on that road. And so it was a joke until a couple of months ago, and I've had a couple of them come back to me and say, "Oh, now I understand what you were talking about." Right. So I live in a community where I love it in a sense. You will have a African American person here, and next door you will have a person with a Confederate flag.
Gotcha.
That's how this area is. It's
where
really,
you are now.
Really interesting dynamics here.
Yeah.
So that's where I'm at currently. It's just I'm not going to just pretend. I'm going to make a joke about it, but you are going to be aware that this is real to me. Right.
And again, your experience. Dayla talked about how the support is so important, especially in these types of settings that are not comfortable for you. Yardan said, would you please explain one struggle you turned into success? And especially, maybe specifically at work. I remember us talking about some of the school psychology cases that you had.
Oh.
And how you struggled with some of the situations that you were in, but more specifically, how did you struggle with bias in testing, and what did you do with that struggle? That's something I always think about whenever I hear kids are being tested in school, whenever I hear independent evaluation, independent evaluator, because we all come to the table with biases, period. And
Absolutely.
everything we bring to any setting is based on our world view. So how did you deal with those biases in testing?
So my perspective as when I was operating as a school psychologist is, what do the kids need? And so in getting teachers to understand what it means to live in poverty. Again, that doesn't have a color.
Right.
But
Right.
but what does that look like? And so I would do the testing, but I would try to get people to see it's bigger than that. You know, can we look at our teaching practices? Can we look at our interventions?
Yeah.
Because these numbers may not represent this particular student. And so there were times I was the only one in the expulsion hearing saying, I think maybe this is just his emotions because his daddy just got out of jail and his mother doesn't have custody of him, and he lives with his great grandmother, and maybe that's why he turned the table over.
The bigger picture.
Just having a lot of disagreement with that. I also understand the struggle from the school's perspective. That they have to keep students safe.
Right.
You know, and that they're limited.
Yeah.
They feel. Creative, and there's a lot more. You know, I've been out of the field a couple of years. Dayla actually could speak to this a lot better than me, but there's more in the field so that we can address the whole child.
Yeah.
So I guess I didn't address it directly, but I just try to take the emphasis off of it.
Gotcha. So you
and
made
I
sure
was
to
very specific in including parents
in the meetings. Okay. Because they were also able to be an advocate at that point for their child and talk about that bigger picture. That's something I always think about, just because I wonder how many students don't have people like you in the room. And then they end up on that path that they really, that's not going to help them. Like you said, you know, what's going to help this child? Yeah, addressing and supporting the whole child. And that's just not always the agenda of the people who are making these decisions. So, yeah.
I think it's personal for me because I don't do well on tests. You know, part of it is because I have some anxiety, but part of it is I'm just not a good test taker. And I think about what would happen if I took one of those tests.
Yeah, those tests are not easy. They're easy because we give them, right?
Yes, it's personal for me, you know, because I did not get in school because of my scores.
I hear you.
Neither place.
I hear you. Yeah.
That I get into school because of my test scores. So for me, it was personal. And knowing the disproportion of African American males, it tears at your heart. It tears at your heart.
And then the pipeline to prison and all that, but that's also another day. You talked a little bit in your post about exhaustion. We talked a little bit about, you know, your conservative Christian views, just being called an Uncle Tom, the reaction of both sides to different issues. Can you talk a little bit about that exhaustion and how you deal with those conversations where people are characterizing you as something because of what you might believe?
It's really exhausting because, you know, it's back to my original issues, right? I am just not Black enough. And that's hard. And so with Black people, I'm trying to have these conversations. Like, I hear what you're saying. I get what you're saying, but, you know, we cannot walk in fear and bitterness. You know, we can't keep going down these same paths. We do have to look at the bigger picture. We do have to stop labeling people as racist, you know. And so it's those just uncomfortable conversations. But a lot of times I don't say anything when it comes to my family, my friends. I just, because it's not worth it. It's not a hill I wanna die on.
I hear you.
So for then my white side of my family, you know, I've had some very difficult raising your voice type of conversation. So I have been exhausted, and I do what you tell me. I'm intentional about resting. I'm intentional about unplugging. And then, you know, you and my mom have really taught me I don't have to represent all Black people.
No.
And I don't have to represent all white people, right?
Right.
And so just because my views are conservative or you don't get it and you choose to call me that and you choose to label me, then not to take that internally. And then just to be wise.
Okay.
Sometimes I don't need to say anything.
Yeah.
And I feel bad about that. And that's where my struggle is, because I feel like when I walk away from conversations, I'm a win. And I struggle with that a lot.
You said the word inaction. So what does action look like for you? Does action look like, you know, pulling back? Does action look like resting? What does it look like for you?
I think when I feel like I need to have the difficult conversations, finding a way to bring awareness, then I do it. So my posts, that was one of the ways for me to do it, you know, because I have a diverse followers.
Yes.
You know?
Yes. And so
that was the way to do it.
Yeah.
I have a young lady at work. She may watch this later, but we have some very candid conversations.
Yeah.
And I choose to do that because she's willing, but they get very tense. With some of my family members, I just choose to have those conversations. And then I'd go with the opportunities, right? So like when I had an opportunity to speak to my workout group on racism, of course I used all your material, but I said, I'm going to do it. You know, although they were all white ladies, one of them was married to a Black man.
Okay.
But I was like, I'm going to do this.
Yeah.
You know, I am going to put myself in this difficult situation.
Right.
I'm going to do it.
How did that go?
And I did.
How did they receive it?
It went so well. But we have a community already, so I think that was part of my comfort, is they know me.
Yes.
They don't just see me and make all these judgments, and I'm guilty of it too. So, you know, before you all throw arrows at me, I do the same thing. I've been the one that looked at the Black man with the white lady and is like, well, yeah, you know, so I do it too. But they knew me. They know who I am, and so I felt comfortable that if I made a mishap, or I guess this is how I felt, Barbara, that I wouldn't be too white or too Black, that I could just. So it went really well. They were very receptive.
Right.
I have an activity, and almost all of them did it.
Wow.
So
they were receptive.
Yeah, it went well.
And very key point that you just made, you showed up as yourself. So you weren't trying to be more white. You weren't trying to make sure that you were Black enough. You were just Kimba when you showed up. And you were aware of maybe your biases that you had. You were aware of all of the internal work that you've done up to this point. And so you were able to come across more authentically. And that's really important. So what does guilt look like? You mentioned guilt as well a few minutes ago. What does guilt look like as for someone with a white mom and a Black dad? You know, we talk about white guilt from time to time, but what does guilt for you look like?
I think it's, what would a Black person say if I was sitting here with my white family and my uncle says something and I don't say anything? Like, what would a Black person say?
Interesting.
And then the other part is the reality that maybe some of my relatives were slave owners. and maybe, and that there's privilege that comes with that,
Right.
and that there has always been privilege.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, it was known that the light-skinned people whose
Mm-hmm.
fathers were the slave owners got to
Yes.
go to the house and didn't do the work.
That's right.
So it's just the guilt of,
Mm-hmm.
kind of like the white privilege, like,
Mm-hmm.
feel bad about that, like
Mm-hmm.
that's,
Right.
that's a bad feeling.
Right.
So it's heaviness.
Yeah.
That's the way I can describe it. And then this tendency to try to overcompensate or fix it or,
Mm-hmm. We talked a lot about
deal
that.
with that.
Yeah, that overcompensation piece. We talked a little bit about overcompensation too when we spoke. Can you talk about that a little bit? I mean, what does that, because to me, I feel, I described it as, people who might be biracial just doing the most and trying to do too much. But what is that overcompensation about? What is at the root of that?
Well, again, you want to be accepted.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And that
So
belonging.
whether I identify more as white,
Mm-hmm.
and so I'm trying to do white things to be accepted and
Mm-hmm.
pass as white,
Mm-hmm.
or whether I'm trying to be accepted in the Black community.
Right.
And I want to be respected, and I want my voice to be heard, and I'm going to twist my neck too. So it's like,
Uh-huh.
You're just trying to be accepted.
Both sides. Mm-hmm. I hear you. We have another question. Oh, we have a couple of questions.
Oh, we do? Okay,
Yes,
I didn't
we
know
do.
that many people were watching.
We have so many people asking questions. Let's see. The first question is, my best friend needs support in finding a Black therapist. Do you have any resources I can pass along to her? We've been looking together, but, it went away. Yes, definitely. I can, I will DM you, Brittany Richard, about that question. Thank you for asking that question. Another question is, I hate colorism. My husband's grandmother is white. My daughter is light-skinned. I hear comments calling her white girl or light-skinned. She has had, why can't I get these comments to come up? Let's see.
Let me see if I can.
Can you get them? Tap on response. Okay. Let's see. 2 Black, 2 white, 2 be Black. Sounds very isolating. Okay, I can't see the rest of this comment though. Can you speak to colorism, Kimba?
No. It's just hard because everything's color. Even when we were speaking yesterday, like when Dayla said, I'm trying not to describe people by their race, it was like, I don't even know how to do that. And I'm biracial.
Right. Because this is what we've been
so trained.
Right.
And the young people have it right. They don't label with the hard lines that we tend to in this generation X and above. Right. So the millennials have it right. I see it with my nieces.
I was going to ask you about them.
They don't go around saying, I'm Black, or they're raised in a different culture. But I struggle, I guess, because of my father, who I loved and respect.
Right.
Have to prepare your Black child for the world, but yet you don't want them to be dependent on. So kind of like what I told you the other day, like my realization was there are labels, but I don't let them define me. So then I think it's just having that conversation about what we are in our space in America, but not allowing that to limit you.
I hear you.
And so, when my niece was called a little white girl, I said to my brother, well, this is what the Black boy said. And he's like, yeah, well, they just think white because, they saw her mom. And it didn't seem to bother him, but it just was weird to me. Like, she's clearly my color. Yeah. She has some of my hair, so it was weird. So I just think it's just the reality of where we're in.
Right.
It doesn't mean that we need to accept it.
Uh-huh.
And there's nothing wrong with resisting it. Like I said, my mother lived in that time for a little while.
Right.
I just think we have to be careful because you don't want to get into color blindness either. It's that
Right.
weird line.
That's what I was
right?
going to
Because
ask you. Right.
God created diversity, right?
Mhm. So
Where's the line?
Yeah. Crystal said too black to be white, too white to be black. Sounds very isolating. And it's kind of what you alluded to in needing and wanting to belong somewhere, and your mom, you talked about your mom going through that space of color blindness. And
Yep.
I think the generation before the adolescents that we have here, what's that generation, you all? I think they're the generation that's much more, much more colorblind. But I feel that the generation that we have right now is they're just so good at accepting, acknowledging, identifying, and appreciating differences. Someone
Absolutely.
said, even being black and having children of different tones, I have to prepare them for general racism and colorism as well. Exactly. And yes, Dayla, the social construct of racism, Generation Z, yes, affects us all. I have that chart in my mind, and I have to try to place everyone on it as far as the generations go. But so how did your mom move from that place of colorblindness, Kimba? Or do you remember if anything happened or no? Okay.
I don't remember.
Gotcha. Someone said.
Yeah, go ahead. What happened, Mom?
She's listening. I love it.
She told me she was too busy, but obviously she's unbusy. How'd you go from colorblindness to diversity?
I never was completely colorblind.
She never was completely colorblind.
Right.
I oftentimes in my head thought of people as personality, but because we lived in an all-black culture, most of the time they were black. But I thought a lot of times in terms of just personality.
She usually diverts always to personality.
Uh-huh.
But because we were in a black culture,
right,
she was always very well aware of the culture. And I always tell people, my mother knows more about black history. I put her against anybody on this call. She loved, was it Malcolm X, Mom?
Well, X and Martin Luther King lived at the same time.
Yeah, but who did you listen to?
I listened to James Baldwin and Malcolm X.
Yeah. Yeah, so Miss Marine used to listen to Malcolm X.
Yes, and I heard her throw that James Baldwin in there too.
Yes, and
the
story I like to tell about my mother is there was a riot on 3rd Street in Dayton, Ohio, and she was with her best friend. Were you with Aunt Jan or with Daddy? She was with her best friend who was black. She lived with her. My mom in the black community at that time.
Right.
Going down the street.
Yeah.
And, they're like talking about, oh, they're rioting, they're throwing things, or, And my aunt said to my mom, would you please get down? Because you do realize you're white and they will throw something at my car. That's my favorite story about my mom. Because for her, she just, she was who she was.
Right.
So when you met her, she didn't have braids in her hair and all that. My mom was who she was.
So no
but
appropriation. Right.
She was just who she was.
Right.
And she dated my dad at the time too. So
yes.
That's her answer, Barbara.
Thank you. Tell I said thank you so much.
They said thank you, Mommy.
A couple people. Someone said, I have a client starting soon, so I can't. Oh, okay. Thank you so much for joining. So this was the second part to the question.
Okay.
The second part to the question about the young lady who had the grandmother who was white. She said that she has had people tell her daughter to get a tan. What would you tell a young person who is, like teenager, who people are telling, what would you tell her if you could speak to her?
My current mode of speaking to biracial children is the image, because I don't want them to struggle like I did. So it's knowing who you are.
Yeah.
and what your purpose is,
Right.
and being comfortable in your own skin.
Yeah.
So for me,
Mhm.
when I was little, I did want to get a tan because I wanted to look more like people around me.
Yeah.
But to just be comfortable in your own skin. So, and for me, because I have my psychology background, is how did that make you feel?
Mm-hmm.
How would you like to respond to that?
Yeah.
Is there a part of you that thinks you need to get it? And then how can we respond to that? So it's always where you're at of the process of knowing your purpose and your destiny and your image.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Those are the kinds of conversations I have with my friends who have biracial children that allow me to speak into their lives.
Mm-hmm. I hear you.
I hope that's helpful.
Yeah. Thank you. No. With your nieces, how do you speak to them? Do you hear you don't? Okay. Okay.
No, but I do have a friend that allows me to speak to her daughter.
Mm-hmm.
They're very curious.
Okay.
At least the older one is pretty curious. She might watch it later. So, and I just take the opportunity.
Right.
I had a prophecy years ago that I would have young girls that would look up to me. And so when I see people looking, young girls especially, I just smile and wave. You know, ask God if it's the opportunity for me to have a conversation, and just try to walk in confidence,
Right.
you know,
Right.
so they can see that,
Mm-hmm.
and be okay with that, and just take opportunities as they come with these young biracial children. Or I have a interaction with some children now whose parents are white and they've been adopted. And so I just try to take advantage of those opportunities to be open to those conversations and building those relationships.
I hear you. So last question I have for you. What would you tell 8th grade, 13-year-old Kimba?
Well, I would tell her to call Dr. Shabazz and to get an appointment as soon as possible. So, you know, I think what has really helped me is realizing that I am a child of God. That's the bottom line.
Right.
And so being okay with the process.
Yeah.
Because I didn't know that at the time. You know, no one told me adolescence is all about learning who you are. I repeat that a lot to some people as well.
Yeah.
This is your job to figure out who you are.
That's right.
But like I said before, what my bottom line is, and I don't mean to offend anybody, but my bottom line is we are created in the image of God. We have purpose and destiny. And so you can be aware of your labels that people give in America.
Right.
They don't label me like that outside America.
Right.
In America.
Yeah.
But don't let it limit.
I love it.
Don't let those labels limit you. And so those are the conversations I would have with her, and tell her it's okay that the people that look like you don't act like you. It's okay. You don't have to be Black enough. You don't have to deny your white family.
Right.
Like, all that's okay. It's okay. And just be thankful that on that road I have mentors to help me and friends to help me along the way with that.
Well, Kimba, we are about to get cut off, but I just want to thank you for loving me and let you know that I love you, and I appreciate you being here. And more than anything, I appreciate you allowing me to be me, because that's a very multifaceted phenomenon. So yeah,
absolutely. I love you too. I hope this was helpful to everyone, and please let me know if you have any other further questions, Barbara. I'll be happy to answer.
Thank you, and thank you everybody for joining us today. If you have any questions, just put them in the comments. Someone asked if there's a part 2. I don't know. We might be able to come up with some more issues to twist Kimba's arm about. But for now, we appreciate today. We're not going to stress you out, and I'm
getting red. The white side of me is getting red.
Yes. I love this. Thank you, Dr. Ladies. You are welcome, Dr. Jen. All right, everyone. Bye, Deanna. Bye, everyone. Thanks for being here. And we will talk with you next time. Sounds good. All right. Have a good weekend, everyone.
Yes. Bye.